YouTube, Instagram, Facebook are filled with a lot of videos that explain how something very specific will have a very big influence on society. This could be tech channels talking about AI, medical innovations, innovations on vaccines, and whatnot. It could be geopolitical channels that influence international policies, prices of commodities, and so on. It could be channels that discuss about stuff like stock market and finance and like banks and regulations and flow of money. And that again influences the stock market and therefore has kind of an effect on many different things in society. So there is a lot of people talk about geography, about climate change, that can have huge influence on society, like climate weathering, whatnot. So there are these channels, right? So now whenever we are looking at something, oh, this is very important, but then it is important to also understand in a more holistic atmosphere over a more general societal level, getting a holistic view of things, so that yes, this is important, but how important is this in compared to the other stuff? If this goes good, then how good can it get? And if this goes bad, then how much will it influence other parameters? So it is very important to list down what are the parameters that in general affect society. To some degree, I guess many of you will intuitively know these things, but it is always good, coming from a group of science people with a research background, it is always good to structure things, structure the thoughts down into points and subpoints, and then kind of make a model thereon and take the thought in a more step-by-step manner. So moving into the 9 points that primarily influence society in a big way. Point number one is the state. The state includes the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. They make the rules, they implement the rules, and they put the checks and balances so that the rules are implemented well. State is also having a massive influence on people in terms of public service, how policies and decisions are made, and what kind of social welfare protection network does the state provide to the people so that the people are more free to have their own aspirations and grow society collectively. Of course, the state is finally responsible for all aspects of defense and security, and that is one more thing where the society is heavily influenced by the state. Speaking of NGOs is again a very important group that affects society. It has its own activities, including advocacy and activism, raising awareness, running campaigns. It could be climate change. It could be stuff like feminism. It could be a broad range of different issues, from climate to human rights to individual rights to like biodiversity to yeah. It could be practically anything. Among that, like a big part of NGOs, very practical application is the humanitarian aid, where like government or intergovernmental or agencies or even state departments or companies, they work with NGOs to foster sustainable development and well-being of people and support humanitarian causes when there was like there's a flood or there's a crisis and so on. NGOs are the first to be there. Community empowerment and engagement. So again, there is that part. There is the social justice. How is it implemented? NGOs have a broad range of influence and activities that influence society on these points. And finally, research and policy making, which is very closely related to the state. Moving on, the private companies again have a huge role. The private companies are the one that produce most of the stuff that we use today. It is therefore intrinsically associated with production and innovation and job creation. So it makes up a large part of what people find their identity in the society is through their jobs in private companies. The private companies also have corporate social responsibilities in which they are presenting how they are upholding ethical standards and how they are taking environmental and sustainability measures for the well-being of society in general. So these parameters are influencing society in a big way. Companies are also competing with each other, and therefore they are developing very complex chain of supply chain and very complex chain of manufacturing processes, trying to optimize their process and reducing the cost thereby, and trying to get their product in the market, and thereby the benefit for the end consumer is that they get products cheap because there is competition. So yeah, there are these points that have broad influence on society based on the activities of the corporations. Finally, there is investment and economic growth, which is attracting investment and capital for fueling economic expansion, driving business, and stimulating the economy in general. Culture, of course, has a very important role on society in general. There is like it is something that is intrinsic to all people and all to all people and any sense of life in its existence. So it could be like food, tradition, family, customs. It is like many times not changing that aggressively, but certainly family and how well the structure is, how smooth the functionings are, how what kind of behaviors and habits are promoted within the family plays a very important role in shaping the structure of individuals and also the broader aspects of society. Food is something that we may see like, yeah, it's just the stuff, but I mean, our life quality of life and our lifestyle has changed a lot with changes in technology and innovation, and that has led us to and rethinking of food, and therefore the food culture a society promotes, or the food culture a society has a very big role in influencing the behavior of the public in general. Identity, diversity, demography, again, goes without saying. Culture has a very big role to play in defining identity and defining diversity, and also what kind of demographic patterns are there in it. Social relations, norms, values are again defined by culture and the traditions of the place, and these are protected by the expression of culture is protected by heritage and also by language, arts, social media, and literature. Much of it is quite well documented. One thing in particular that highlights that has gained significant prominence is social media. Today, people are spending 6 hours a day on internet, on their phone, browsing stuff in the internet, and that has what kind of stuff you see, what kind of stuff you do, what kind of stuff you like, whom do you follow. It has a lot of role in shaping the society in general and creating the atmosphere around it. Geography is destiny, is what Napoleon said. So yeah, geography that certainly has a very big role in shaping society. If you have a country which has very good naturally defensible boundaries, then naturally the country will be protected, even if it is facing a lot of adversaries from different places, and protecting it will be easy. If a country is blessed with something like oil or something like a lot of wind or some kind of rare earth elements or gold or stuff like that, then use like lithium reserves and so on, then certainly that helps economy, it helps driving the culture, it helps shaping the policies of the state, everything. So natural resources are very important. Then of course people are getting increasingly urbanized, living in cities with more innovations. People are moving out from rural segments, and therefore urban planning is grossly determined by the geography of the place. And that can have a huge influence on society if your cities are like sustainable communities with efficient use of space and spaces where where the communities are made designed in a livable manner. There is simply less traffic jam, and therefore traffic jam has so much to do with geography of the place. Climate and weather patterns. Climate is changing very significantly, and there is a very big geographical aspect to it, which is temperature, precipitation, weather patterns influence agriculture, infrastructure, and human well-being in general. So yeah, that has a big influence on society. Transportation and connectivity. Again, like transportation and connectivity has influenced so much. Connectivity between regions, access to market, impacting economics, trade, security, social integration. Yeah, there's a very broad range of stuff. And finally, geographic boundaries and divisions. That is again very obvious point where political boundaries, jurisdictions, territorial disputes, and governance and diplomacy all are extremely influenced by society, by geography in general. Science and engineering. There is broad. Science and engineering is has been changing at a very rapid pace in the last 150 years, and particularly in the last 5-10 years, innovation is increasing in a very big scale. Uh, Breakthroughs, discoveries, understanding of nature in general, from an atomic scale to like large scale models, developing new computers, doing all sorts of vaccines and stuff. They are all driven by fundamental understanding of science, and the level of education on science and engineering of society has played enormous role on what kind of innovations and inventions a society can do, and how well it will be positioned to develop new infrastructure, and how well will the people be trained in problem solving and critical thinking in general. Religion is the foundation of all societies and the source for all moral values. Belief systems, personal seekings, and spirituality play like a huge role in all kind of personal thought. There is something called pop culture and something called a deep culture. So pop culture would be stuff like music, would be stuff like movies and stuff like food, which would like really easily flow between different regions and between different populations. But there is more deep culture, which is not quite sometimes that much talked about, but fundamentally how the psychological and moral aspects of a human being or a society in general is developed. And many of the times these are manifested in the habits that a family promotes, or rituals and ceremonies that are conducted and that are promoted in within the community, fostering a sense of belongingness and strengthening the identity. Of course, these parameters have a huge role on the group behavior and also influence laws and social norms enormously. History, well, history is history. History is useless, to be very frank. There are so many places where history doesn't rhyme. There is so much of science and engineering that has changed everything that existed in the past so dramatically. So history individually itself is not relevant, but let's say denial of history and just the timeline and historical events plays a very important role on the shaping of a society. Its cultural and social transformation is heavily influenced by history. Its shaping and evolution of customs and traditions and ideologies and social structures are heavily influenced by how it has been in the past. And what has been in the past, its denial or its question, or putting that in question, also has a very important effect on the psychology of individuals, which affect the collective memory, because the collective memory is where actually all what we have learned in form of mistakes, trying to avoid it and making more informed decisions come in. And much of this is preserved in form of museums and in form of buildings and stuff, which are all historical artifacts, documents, monuments, etc. And preserving them again becomes a very important part of shaping society on the longer run. And one of the things that anybody of great influence tries to do is he tries to see himself and compares how will history judge me 10, 20, 50, 100 years down the line. And examining that gives a very big role in how people will take decisions today. So yeah, through these points, history has a very important role in shaping the behaviors of leaders, making decisions for society, and also understanding how is a society likely going to behave in a given situation based on their historical patterns. Moving on, finance and economy. The lack of money is root to all evil. Money, in its fundamental nature, has changed its existence very significantly. Money is international trade and financial availability, and its flow has become easier than like history in general. And also, the money as a source has also changed significantly, as it is no longer supported by any reserve like gold or something else. And to add to it, it is also something which is printed a lot from reserve banks and throughout the world, frankly. So yeah, so therefore central banks, banks in general, and debt structures become very important role in understanding how the stock market is going to behave, how well it is aligned with asset capitalization, and how well it is aligned with the fast moving science and innovation in the world. And fundamentally, money is what contributes to the production and distribution of goods and services, and it is therefore intrinsically finances related to demand and supply. On the supply side, it is of course a bunch of different other aspects like supply chain, availability of products, availability of machineries, development of skills for people, for implementation, and so on. And on the demand side is also changes. For example, with Corona, like demand for travel companies and demand for traveling stuff like flights and everything was just less. Tourism companies just had less traffic. So demand can also change a lot with like with changes in like medical changes in medical situation of people, like if there's a pandemic or if there is like war, or if there is any other issues. Again, like capitalism, communalism, socialism, economic models have a huge role on society in general, and how the models are implemented, what kind of inequality is there, how is it being addressed, or is it getting perpetuated further. So yeah, so these things play a very big role. One point which is remarkably important is the foreign exchange reserve. There are countries like Sri Lanka right now, which are like fine countries. Population is fairly like non-violent. There isn't any war or like violence-like situation. People are fairly civil. The place was doing quite well. There was a lot of good roads, very beautiful places, a lot of production of agricultural produce, some industrial produce as well. It was at a good geographical location. One would say that it was blessed with geography. It was having a lot of science and engineering which it could implement. So it had a good pathway to grow. But it was a country that had a lot of beautiful places, and therefore it made sense to make it a tourism-based country. And with the corona coming in, the tourism just fell down like crazy. And at the same time, the country, because it was hoping to have a lot of development, it had taken a lot of loan, and these loan the bills had to be paid, and now the income was not there. So simply, the country defaulted on its foreign exchange reserve. And although the country may have good ratings on many other points, it just became a bankrupt nation. So foreign exchange reserve can have a huge role on trade and globalization, and can have a profound impact on economic growth, on cultural exchange, on geopolitical relationship, stability of the nation, and facilitation of transaction and trade in general. It must be highlighted that many of the factors that you will see in internet or otherwise will have a role to play in more than one of them. There is often activities that are done by the state in correlation with NGOs. Like if the state has to implement an awareness program or has to grow some kind of knowledge about something, then it will always use a lot of NGOs to address any social issues or provide essential services to people. And likewise, so the state is also working a lot with private companies in the sense that if it has to do infrastructure development, if it has to do public services like healthcare, like education, infrastructure development, many of this stuff is working with private companies. Private companies and NGOs also play a very big role in influencing state policies, setting regulations, and private companies kind of decide, provide information on what is feasible. NGOs decide on and provide on what is desirable. Culture and religion, of course, are very much intertwined. Social norms and social values and the fundamental ethics of society is very much intertwined between culture and religion. Science, engineering, and geography goes without saying are so much intertwined. The contribution of geographical changes such as uh, mm, contribution of science and engineering has huge contribution to geographical changes such as urbanization, transport infrastructure, etc. Again, history and culture also has huge influence on each other, forming the basis of the identity of the society. And historical interpretation, cultural plays play an enormous role on interpreting and preserving historical events and its artifacts. It must be also highlighted that these are like the 9 points, and sometimes the point, whatever is happening, could be more than 1 point. But sometimes 1 point can have like 100 subpoints, and out of the 100 subpoints, something very particular can have a huge role on society in general and on like multiple points in general. Like let's say in culture, there is the whole declining birth rate issues in many countries like Japan and Germany and Canada and so on. A declining birth rate means that there will be less young people, there will be less people to consume stuff, there will be less people to sell stuff. So naturally, the economy will reduce, and the economy will have to provide for, and there will be less productive population in the coming time. So that will be even more difficult for running the economy. And these difficulties may not have a very big role if robotics and artificial intelligence are implemented on a very large scale, and if the development happens at a very good rate. Then maybe all stuff are made by robots, and therefore the lack of human being may not have that much of an influence. And then stuff can be made by robots, stuff can be consumed by robots, and new discoveries and new developments can keep on happening. But if that kind of situation does not appear very quickly, then the population, the productive population, and the young population will still have a very important role to play. And therefore, it depends on other factors how important this declining birth rate will be in any given situation. So, state and police corruption is again a very important factor. Let's say the state is working a lot with private companies, doing innovation, supporting innovation, getting ahead with development of new products, working on like large scale infrastructure development, working on like healthcare and education with private companies, working with NGOs on implementing awareness, working on social issues, everything. So there is a lot of place where the state has manifested itself by private companies or by NGOs. But police and law enforcement is one thing where it is never done by NGOs, it is never done by private companies. They will never see a private police, or you will never see private tax collecting bodies. They are typically done by, and police in particular, like tax collection can also be done by the banks. Like the state can just take money out of your bank account. So yeah, and the banks are there are private banks. So and then you have to go to the bank and you have to resolve it with them, and they will discuss it with the state. So I mean, and the manifestation of the state, direct manifestation of the state onto the population, is very prominently done by the police. And if the police, and let's say the state is working well, but there is police brutality, or there is like police corruption, or like police union, which is like not liked by people, then although the state is doing a lot of stuff that is in general good for society, there might be an opinion which is very anti-state within the population, simply because the interaction with the police has not been that great. Again, science and engineering can have very specific subpoints. Like for example, science you have math, physics, chemistry, biology, so many different topics. And then you have like between physics and maths, you will have something like internet, and within internet there's social media, and within social media there's all these factors of social addiction, just like social media addiction, cyberbullying, social isolation, and which is having a huge influence on like culture. It is having a huge influence on the state in general, on behaviors, on religion, on very point, on standards and ethics, and so on. So some very small point within science can have a very big influence on other points as well. Just a few more graphs to show how the variation in declining birth rate over time has also taken place in Japan and how it has been over the different years. Yeah, again, religion and history, denial of history, like denial of Holocaust, can have a very lasting impact on societal attitudes and perception. Also, terrorism and acts of violence in the name of religion have uh, had its own effect on society in general in various different ways. So, conclusion: it is very important to understand that the 9 points of society are there whenever you are trying to make a holistic opinion. When you are trying to understand something in the larger context, then you can always come and refer to this uh, demonstration, this presentation, so that you can kind of set that okay, this stuff maybe what somebody is saying is correct, but how important is it? Okay, it is going to impact this X Y Z parameters, but is it going to affect all the parameters? Or like let's say how much is it going to affect my region or my society if there is something specific happening somewhere? So let's say there is a food, let's say there is bad climate, and let's say there is a lot of problem that can happen throughout the world because if there is not good agriculture or good production. But let's say you're living in a country which is like a self-sufficient, food self-sufficient, then you can be kind of quite certain that, and you have good storage and all. And then you can kind of be certain that yes, although this stuff can happen, but it is more likely to affect those countries which are food importing countries and which have very little individual food production ability. Because any country, like if a country is there and if somebody pays high price, then you can sell a laptop to another country and not sell it to your fellow countrymen. If you're producing a laptop, or if you're producing like um, let's say automobile, or let's say um, a, a electronic device in general, you can always sell it to other countries and you can say, I'll sell it to my people later, let me make my money. But you will never sell your food to another country if your people are hungry. You will manage it within the society. So there can be very specific places where there is like huge influence, and other places where the same parameter may have very little influence. Understanding the geography, understanding the science, engineering aspect of the place is very important before like a very general opinion is made on anything specific. And this is more applicable to the politics. Like many times people are watching political videos and people are getting very worried, oh, this is very bad, this is very good. But let's say if a country is good in its private companies, it is good in its, let's say, its geography is good. It's, in general, the culture is okay. Then, and science and engineering is doing good. The economics and finances, like there's a lot of strong financial institutions that are, like there's a lot of companies and a lot of debt-based structures that are there, is able to provide financing. Then in general, even if there is like political turmoil, the state is going to be fine. But if let's say multiple parameters are consistently failing, then there is like reason for more concern. And therefore, I would like people to have, like, when people get opinion and when people get advice, I would like you to have questions that you can't answer, then have answers that you can't question. And if you have any thoughtful comments and questions, if you want us to study any specific situation and put it in these order of these 9 points and sub points, or how different societies are interacting, cooperating, competing, and conflicting with each other, how would the mix of those parameters come in here? How does these parameters work? If you have any questions, if you want us to do any case study of anything specific, please comment and provide more descriptions. And if you are a professional working on any of these domains, such as economics, such as sociology, such as science, innovation, engineering, we'd be very happy to have a word with you and understanding the aspects that you work on, how in general it would, how would it be, how we would map it in this holistic framework. Thank you.